It's been almost a year since Phrolova's first appearance, and now the time has come. She's finally available as a playable character, and man, her ability allows her to achieve some insane critical damage, even with 0 sequences. And in today's video, I will showcase to you how to achieve Phrolova's max potential by explaining her best rotations, weapons, echoes, and teams. Which, by the way, she's not just tied to those 2 Havoc gremlins. No, Phrolova has more than one viable team. So whether you're still thinking of pulling for her or looking for the complete Phrolova guide, this is the video you need to watch. As always, keep in mind footage shown here is from a test server, so final content and Phrolova stats are subject to change. Now, the thing you need to understand about this musical puppeteer is that she is the first summoner unit in the game, and her whole playstyle revolves around manipulating her trusty Echo Hecate. How this translates to actual benefits and stats? Well, let's just say Havoc teams are eating good here, since not only Phrolova can provide on average over 1.5 million damage in a rotation, but she also boosts Havoc and heavy damage with her outro, which will be relevant if you have Ochia. However, other units like Havoc Rover, Danjin, and even Jian, yes, our dear Jian, can benefit from this. And in the team section, I'll talk about this more, but long story short, Miss Phrolova is surprisingly adaptable, especially since her Echo Puppet also fights when she's off-field. Anyway, that's the basic gist of her capabilities. What's not so basic though is the actual kit. My god, this time around it's a mouthful and all over the place. However, here's a simple and easy explanation so you can save your brain power for other matters. Okay, so the most important thing you need to keep an eye on would be her musical notes, because unlike anyone else in the game, Phrolova's liberation does not require energy. In fact, it's always set to 0, and instead, she needs to achieve 6 of the notes on her forte bar, which then allows her to trigger this super powerful hold attack, and then the liberation becomes available to use. Now there's several ways how she can achieve notes as shown here, and starting with basic 3, it will generate 1 note. However, you can also immediately follow up with basic forte, which is possible to do after basic 3, which will also generate 1 note. Similarly, when using her skill, it generates 1 note, and afterwards, her skill forte also generates 1 note. Also, you might have noticed this, but her basic forte and skill forte can be mixed and matched between skill and basic 3. So, for example, you could do a quick little combo like basic 3, followed by forte skill, and then skill yet again, followed by basic forte, which would generate a total of 4 notes very quickly. Here are some combos shown here that you can follow along to achieve notes quickly. I especially like going from basic 3 to skill forte, since you can save time by quickly cancelling basic 3 animation with a skill button. Oh, and keep in mind, triggering her intro or dodge counter allows her to immediately follow up with basic 3, which can enable even faster and reactive rotations. Still, why are the notes in different colors, you ask? Well, this is where we have to talk about her ultimate puppet ability. Once all 6 notes are achieved, you must make it available by using her hold attack, and after this cool animation and damage, you can then activate the liberation. So yes, she just needs 6 notes, and after using the liberation, it will enter a 25-second cooldown, which can be tracked by this little cool hourglass right above her forte bar. Technically, after using her hold attack, this hourglass starts running, and liberation when casted goes into this so-called maestro state for 24 seconds, but it's more or less the same thing. And most importantly, Phrolova during liberation obtains a massive 120% attack boost. Quite insane, and usually translates to about extra 1000 attack. Now, as you can see, Phrolova can control Hecate directly. While she's on field, any damage Hecate takes will be transferred to poor Phrolova. However, you can spam basic attacks 1 and 2, and after each string, next one becomes enhanced basic, which will depend on the current note. Red notes, which she obtains from basic and basic forte, will stagnate and deal slightly more damage. Purple notes, which she obtains using her skill or skill forte, will group up the enemies, and then the last note type is a combo of the 2 called cadenza. The only way she can obtain it is after she uses her intro or echo skill, which then transforms the next incoming note from either basic, basic forte, skill, or skill forte. And ultimately, this cadenza note, when unleashed by the puppet enhanced basic attack, will utilize both benefits: stagnating, slightly better damage, and grouping. So yeah, those notes you compose before the liberation then can be unleashed as enhanced attacks during it. However, I do not recommend using Phrolova on field and immediately switch to the next unit, because Hecate will continue fighting even when Phrolova is no longer active. Most important of all, any enhanced attacks Hecate deals while Phrolova is off field will also grant 1 after sound stack, which increases her critical damage by 2.5% for the first 24 stacks, and will also boost her hold attack multipliers next time you trigger it with 6 notes. In fact, Phrolova will always start fights with 10 after sound immediately thanks to her second inherent skill, and as you can see, she can gain up to 160% critical damage. But realistically, this won't happen a lot unless the fights drag on for way too long, or I also found that since the stacks only disappear after 30 seconds out of combat, so if you're farming echoes very fast in the world, you could easily max out the stacks as well. Like, you can see the first 24 stacks that give 2.5% and then 100 stacks that give 1% each, so 160% critical damage. Pretty wicked, I would say, when my Phrolova now has over 400% critical damage. And keep in mind, she's S0 here, but later on when we talk about sequences, I will explain how she can gain after sound faster. Still, it's extremely crucial to understand that Hecate's enhanced attacks will only trigger when teammates use echo skills. Yes, echo skills, not regular skills. So for example, in a random team with Havoc Rover and Danjin, in a single rotation, each will only use their active echo once, so 2 after sound will be obtained. However, when triggering Phrolova's outro, Hecate immediately performs 2 enhanced attacks always. So after 1 rotation and when switching back to Phrolova, this will result in 14 after sound if the fight just started. What's also cool is that after sound lingers whole combat and only disappears after she's out of combat for some time. Now, there are some units who can grant more after sound to Phrolova, namely Cantarella, where some of her attacks are treated as echo skills. And then there's Rochia, whose gadget you can use with anyone to trigger it as an extra echo skill. Who knows, maybe in the future when new units come out, some will be able to synergize even better with Phrolova if they have a lot of echo skill attacks. But yeah, that's how she works in a nutshell. You can track her liberation when she's off field right here. These little circles represent the duration of each note, which lasts about 4 seconds each, and when you switch back to her, she will perform a super intro that deals a lot of damage. So, with that out of the way, what about her rotations? Well, here's an example rotation with her meta team, which is made up of Cantarella and Rochia. However, I would say no matter in which team you play, the main thing you want to do with Phrolova is to obtain those 6 notes, hold basic attack, and then use liberation and switch out. And then, make sure teammates spam all echo skills they have, so the puppet can unleash enhanced basics, and finally switch back to Phrolova once their rotations are done for the super intro and rinse and repeat. Phew, that still took a lot of effort to explain, I guess. Well, time to talk about her build now. So, when looking at Phrolova's ability leveling priority, first you want to focus on Liberation, then Basics, then Forte, and finally Intro and Skill. And of course, make sure to unlock both her inherent skills as soon as possible. Also, majority of her damage is treated as either echo or skill damage, so keep that in mind when evaluating weapons and echoes. Speaking of which, what's up with this tiny violin? Well, as minuscule as it is, it packs a ton of power because it's got a nice, fat 24% critical rate substat, and then its passive, as usual, gives unconditional 12% attack increase, and after dealing echo skill damage, resonance skill damage gains 32% bonus, and echo skill damage is amplified by 32% as well, while also ignoring enemies' defense by 8% for 12 seconds. Long story short, this boosts her damage by a lot. In fact, when looking at her next best option, String Master, it's already 17 to 20% behind, while Whisper of the Sea and Rime Draped Sprouts are even weaker by a few percent more, followed by Luminous Hymn, which also starts to fall behind. And by the time we arrive to Cosmic Ripples, the free-to-play 5-star Rectifier, it's about 30 to 35% weaker. However, if you don't have it, R5 Augment honestly isn't that bad compared. And then there's other remaining 4-star options you can check out in this weapon table. But moving over to echoes, the best option is Crystal Clear. The latest 3-piece echo Dream of the Lost is tailor-made just for Phrolova. Yes, it's only a 3-set bonus, while conventionally all other sets had both 2-set and 5-set bonuses. However, Dream of the Lost provides a massive 20% critical rate and 35% echo skill damage bonus for units who have 0 energy. And since Phrolova never has any energy, just like I have never any luck when pulling, well, just slap this set on her before I start crying. Still, this means she needs a 2-set bonus additionally. Well, the best one would be Havoc set, but you can also go for Lingering Tunes 2-piece. Just keep in mind, since she already gains a ton of attack percent from her Liberation, Havoc would be slightly better. Now, like usual, build her loadout with 4-3-3-1-1 and focus on getting critical rate or damage depending on which one she needs for the 4-cost main stat. Then 3 costs should have Havoc damage, or it's fine if one of them is attack percent, but Havoc is better. And then as always, 1 cost should be attack attack percent. Also, if you're having trouble farming for the main stats with good substats, it's not the worst idea to go for the 44111 loadout, but it won't be as good as 43311. Finally, make sure her active echo is Hecate from the new set, since she gives the best boosting. Lastly, when it comes to substats, since Phrolova has no need for energy, those substats are as good as dead to you. So focus on getting critical rate and damage as usual, then grab as much attack percent as possible. Finally, skill damage won't hurt to get since she does a decent amount of it, and then the last priority goes to flat attack. So yeah, ideally, or well, godlike substat rolls on NPs would be all these 5 shown here. Good luck farming, gacha gamers. I know I will need it. It's no secret by now, you probably watched other videos before mine, so you already know that Phrolova's best team is made up of Cantarella and Rochia. This meta team comp works like a well-oiled machine. You start with Phrolova, do her full rotation, then switch out and pass her outro, which is fully utilized by Rochia, who then, after doing her stomping shenanigans, passes over her outro that's fully utilized by Cantarella, and then Cantarella passes over her outro that's fully utilized by Phrolova. Yes, so much outro stuff going on. It's also important to note that Rochia's magic box ability that you can trigger at least on keyboard with T default keybind will count as echo skill, which means 1 stack of after sound for Phrolova, and then Cantarella has up to 3 echo skill casts. Usually I like to use Rochia's magic box when doing Cantarella's rotation. But what about alternatives? Well, Cantarella's big assets she brings over are a bit harder to replace, but you can instead of her place use someone like Havoc Rover or Dungeon, or if you don't have Rochia, use them both. However, if you do have Cantarella, but not Rochia, then instead of her, you could use someone like Jeji, whose outro amplifies skill damage, or go for Sanhua, or even Shorekeeper. Of course, you can also just use Havoc Rover or Dungeon. I also heard good things from other theory crafters about Jian and Shorekeeper duo, or there's even this wacky Jeji and Kalada duo you could go for as well. Point is, there's quite a few ways to play Phrolova teams, but obviously her meta team comp will remain the best. Well, at least at the time of making this guide. Alright, time to see how rich you are. Well, Ashtrite-wise. Maybe you hoarded it for this summoner. Anyway, so looking at first sequence, she will start combat with 2 more notes, while also increasing her basic forte and skill forte damage. Overall, a very solid sequence that helps shorten her rotation thanks to those 2 additional notes. Now, as for second sequence, hold basic damage is increased further by the after sound stacks, and when casting it, now grants her a ton of additional after sound. But S3 is where things get super serious. Her echo skill damage is straight up amplified by 80%, and now her hold basic will transform all notes into cadenza, which also now decreases enemy attack. Pretty serious stuff. Moving over to S4, basically grants the team 20% attribute damage bonus, great for those wacky multi-attribute teams, but also for just simply mono havoc. Then S5 is more or less just a survivability upgrade, it's like fine or whatever. But then you're 1 step closer to godhood, S6. Now, Hecate's enhanced attacks will be increased, but more importantly, from now on, Hecate descends with a new move every time Phrolova unleashes her basic forte and or skill forte, while at the same time granting her a ton of after sound, and quickly ramps up her critical damage by ridiculous amounts. But yeah, at this point, you'll also probably ramp up a big negative in your bank account, unless you're one of those royal family members. Anyway, I would first recommend getting her signature, which boosts her damage by a lot. And then sequence 2, 3, and 6 are the biggest power boosts you can get. Well, I mean, S6 will unleash insane power, but overall, she's a fun unit to play around with. Kuro definitely didn't hold back with all those puppet animations. And Phrolova, or should I say Hecate with Phrolova, feel amazing to play with, and I believe there's still room to grow for her potential, especially if Kuro ever releases units who can spam a lot of echo skills. But yeah, hope you found this video useful, and I'd really appreciate it if you could press the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and see you next time.